Yes, I picked this background on purpose because I wanted to wake you up. And why? Because we're about to start poetry. Poetry is probably one of my favorite topics and subjects, uh, anything in English at all. I think what I like about it is that it is so short and sweet and to the point, and it kind of sticks with you. You can remember a line of poetry that really affected you, and it could give you energy or courage to get through tough parts in your life. It's just having a good poem with you really touches everything about you that is human. So it's why I just love it so much. Now, here's the thing about poetry, though. Poetry can be tough or it can look overwhelming, especially if you read it and you have no idea what's going on, which does happen sometimes. Sometimes there's some pretty deep or confusing or crazy poems. So, what I think would help you is if you try to do the same thing every time. Okay? This kind of approach will make it easier, kind of like a ritual that you can get used to. So, the first thing you want to do is read it out loud once. Then, after you've done it, read it quietly to yourself. This should be easy at home. You should be able to read it out loud at once. You're not going to disrupt class. It's not going to annoy your partner. Read it out loud. Here's the thing about poetry, right? It was made, poetry is made to be read out loud. And that's how poetry started, right? It started with people like Homer from thousands of years ago, who would go from city to city and people would listen to him tell his stories, right? He would tell the Iliad or tell the Odyssey about all these amazing gods and goddesses and all these heroes. And people loved it, right? So people had the connection, and they're meant to be read out loud. And poetry quickly evolved into songs where people would go from city to city or even sing in their city and sing songs, which is poetry. And we know how popular music is now. So, poetry still lives on, even if you look at it in different forms. Now, as you read it the first time, concentrate on difficult stanzas. Right? You're going to see there's some things you get and you understand, and other times there's going to be lines that are confusing or entire stanzas that are confusing. Focus on those the second time you read it. And then, if you need to, reread it again. A third time, even a fourth time. Sometimes it might take you 5 or 6 times to really understand what's going on in the story. The poem, sorry. It happens, think about it, right? I could condense an entire chapter's worth of stuff into one small little poem. Now, some tips for you to think about. And let me change my color here so you can see something else here. Tips. Now, this is a thing that I think surprises a lot of people, especially when you write, is when you're reading poetry, you keep reading it and you keep going until you have a reason to stop or to pause. You'll pause if you see a comma, especially at the end of a sentence. If you see something at the end of a sentence or in the middle of a sentence, though, then what you need to do, you have a bigger stop, like a period or a dash or a semicolon. Dashes are very popular with Emily Dickinson, very famous poet, American poet. Something else you could do, you could just quickly look up the poet. Try to understand a little bit about him or her, maybe some of the popular topics they write about. So if you, for example, found yourself reading a Walt Whitman poem and you looked him up, you would know he writes a lot about nature and he writes a lot about the power and beauty of humanity. When you look at it, try to ask yourself, is there some kind of structure going on? Like, does it seem like there's rhyme? Does it seem like um, maybe there's a pattern? Or does it seem very free flowing? Do you notice any allusions, right? An allusion is a reference to something famous in terms of literature or a historical figure. You'll see this a lot in poems, right? And usually those allusions are not just picked randomly. They serve a very important purpose and usually very symbolic purpose, and we'll talk about that. Do you notice any kind of metaphors or other types of poetic devices like alliteration, rhyme, similes, symbolism? And as you read it and as you finish each reading, you really want to think about, what am I getting from this poem? Do I feel like this is like teaching me something? Do I feel like this is leaving me with some important message that I could kind of like internalize and take with me wherever I go? That's an important thing. And lots of times that's what poets want. Poets want you to take something from their words.